Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm really greatly honored today to be joined by a really interesting person that I've come across on LinkedIn. His name is Rusty Gaillard, and Rusty is the founder of Silicon Valley Dream Builders. He is the former worldwide head of finance for Apple and has broken away from that career to follow his dream to become a speaker and a coach, and a best-selling author of a book called Breaking the Code. And we'll talk quite a bit about that book in today's episode. He's also the host of a live streaming show called Fork in the Road, which is also very much synonymous with the discussion that we're going to have today about people and leaders that have followed very successful or outwardly successful careers, but potentially have not achieved fulfillment and joy in the pursuit of that career. So, Rusty, absolutely great to have you here today. Please do introduce yourself to our audience, give a little bit more detail on your background and what led you to be with us today.
Thanks, Mick. I'm super happy to be here with you. As you said, I spent a number of years working at Apple. I was at 13 years at Apple, but that was the culmination of a long corporate career. I tend to describe my background as a traditional corporate experience. I came out of college, I got my first job, navigated that, went to business school, and then just was climbing the corporate ladder. At some point along that journey, I realized that my corporate aspirations started to conflict with who I wanted to be as a family member and as a father. My son was 2 years old. I had just been promoted and I was the director of finance at Apple. It was a worldwide role. As you know, Mick, and maybe some of your listeners know, in a worldwide role, you've got mornings, you've got evenings, you tend to work at all hours of the day because you're working with people all over the world in different time zones. And I wanted to be home. I wanted to be home with my son and have dinner together and be present and be a part of his evenings. And that was creating a huge challenge for me, to the point where I was trying to duck out of work to be home, but then I was still missing things at home. And I just was feeling like a failure in both places. And maybe some people listening can relate to that, where it just feels like you're doing everything that you know how to do, but it doesn't feel like enough. And that's where I was. And the best option I had at that point in my life, the only thing I really knew to do, was to make a choice. It's like, well, I'm going to either choose my career or I'm going to choose my family. And I chose my family. And it was scary. I didn't do it well. It was nerve-wracking. But the way that happened is I was hiring for a position on my team and I hired myself. Basically demoted myself, hired myself into a lower level job to be present with my family and be there as a father, which was a wonderful personal decision. I will never regret that. It was just some of the best, memories of my life, is being there as a father. And from a professional standpoint, I put myself on a dead end. I was no longer climbing the ladder. I was now static. And I ended up in that job for about 8 years. From the outside, things looked really good. I'm still working at Apple. It's a great company. It was stable. I could easily do my job because I was now doing a job that was, I had done earlier in my career. So it was, from a professional standpoint, it wasn't particularly hard, but it also wasn't rewarding because I was no longer climbing the ladder. I was no longer, didn't see myself in the same way, and just started to question, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? Am I going to keep doing this until I retire? Do I just stay here and wait another 15 years? And that idea, where work takes up so much of your life, and to just be static and to be waiting, I didn't want to do that. But I didn't know what else to do. And that's why I stayed in that job for 8 years, until finally somebody helped me to break through some of the assumptions and limitations and constraints I had about what's possible. And that kind of became the essence of my book, Breaking the Code, but also helped me to break through and find this new path of becoming a coach.
That's really interesting, Rusty, and we're getting quite deep quite quickly. So forgive me for that, but you've piqued my curiosity so quickly. Everyone in the world wants to achieve that elusive work-life balance, and they are after a rewarding career, but they don't want it to be at the expense of their family life and their life outside the work front, right? And the words I heard from you was that you actually were trying to be successful in both and you felt like a failure in both.
Mm-hmm.
When you're at the height of your career and you were trying to still be there for your family, the word you used was a failure at both. Tell me what you mean by failure.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I'll answer it first on the personal side, just that I felt this pull to be home, both from my wife and my son, and from me. Early in my career, when I was just out of college, I remember talking to somebody who was just on the cusp of retirement, and he had been in the military. And he said to me, and he was very successful in the military, had climbed the ranks. And he said to me, the thing I regret is I put so much of my time and energy into work and I wasn't around for my family. And if I had to do it all over again, I would do it differently. I remember that conversation so well. I can picture the table we were sitting at. I can picture the view. I can picture the whole thing because it had such an impact on me. And I remembered that when I came to this moment of feeling like I have to make a choice because I just wasn't present in the way I wanted to be. Even if I was physically there, my mind was at work. I was feeling guilty. I was feeling stressed, trying to sneak off and check email. Am I missing something? So it was just either not physically there or physically there, but not really mentally there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and I kept repeating that conversation and what this guy had told me in my head. And I said, I want to be like, I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to find myself when my child or children are grown, regretting that I wasn't there more with them. And so I made the decision and that's what failure at home was. And failure at work was just in those moments where I did decide to go home and be there, I just felt like, I was ducking out of a meeting or I was trying to sneak around, or I had a hard time really owning it and being straightforward with people and saying, no, this is a priority for me and I can be back later. Again, I didn't have some of the tools then that I have now. And so to me, it just felt like trying to manage this impossible situation and not having the time I know I needed to invest to be successful at work. And so I just saw things not going the way I wanted them to, not going as well as I thought. And so that's really what the failure was there, is just not doing as good a job as I knew I could do, but also not feeling like I had any more time to invest in it.
You've used some really interesting words there. You've spoken about presence and inferred the concept of mindfulness, really being there and being present in the moment. And then you've used the word guilt. And I'd like to double click on this and explore that a little bit further with you. So what I'm hearing from you is a feeling of guilt that when you're at work, that you weren't fully present because you feel guilty because your family is waiting for you. But when you're with the family and you've dropped everything at work, you're feeling guilt about the things that you haven't done at work. So in both cases, can I surmise that you weren't fully present and mindful in either location because you always had one guilty eye on where you weren't? Is that a fair summary?
It's a great summary. And unfortunately, I think it's pretty common for a lot of people, especially people who are successful in their life, successful. And I put that in quotes because it's successful from the external sense of position and title and authority and salary and all of that, right? In today's world, that degree of success often requires a lot of time and energy. And so people end up feeling guilty because they're not really showing up in life the way that they want to, as a family member, as a person, and just personally, right? Having time for themselves to do the things they like.
And you know what? I'll just add and say, everyone can feel that, by the way, right? So When I'm sure that our audience are empathizing right now and going, yep, I've been there. Many of people will be thinking, I've felt the exact things that Rusty is talking about. The people that you're with feel it too, is what I want to extrapolate from that. So if you're with your family and part of your brain is still at work, people feel that you're not fully present with them. And if you're at work and your mind is somewhere else and you're wondering about all the things that you haven't done at home, people feel that as well. So you're feeling guilty, but then other people are also feeling your lack of presence. Any thought on that?
100%. And just as you're saying that, Mick, I feel sad, right? And to me, this is one of the reasons I do the work that I do, is I lived through that place and it was uncomfortable for me, but as you said, it affects the people around me too. It affects the people at work. It affects my family. It affects my happiness, right? So it's this whole bubble of starting with me, of people who are affected by my discomfort and my inability to manage the situation. And I think that's sad, because I think there's a lot of people in the world who live that way. And it affects not only them, but all the people around them. And that's for me, that's both a sad place to be, but is also an opportunity, because it doesn't have to be that way. And seeing people who have found a way to the other side, and I've found a way to the other side. And I think that for me, the lesson I take out of that is, holy cow, if I can do this, anyone can do this. Because I was so entrenched in that place that you just described. If I could meander my way out of that and find it with a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, it's possible for anybody.
So thank you for being open about your feelings about that, and mentioning the word sad and some of the conflict that comes along with that. And for the audience of home, please do stay with us. This story does have a happy ending, and you can come out of the other end. The first step that you took, though, Rusty, listening to you there, the first step you took was a demotion. So I'm going to say, attempt number one at achieving balance was to back off on your career aspirations and take a demotion back into what I would call a comfort zone job, where you could almost do the job on autopilot. Sorry, I'm extrapolating. You didn't use these words, but almost do the job on autopilot so that you could be more present for your family. That's essentially a sacrifice. And when I'm reading in your book, you're saying that maybe sacrifices are not always necessary. But tell us about that first stage. Tell us about what you tried when you took that demotion, how that felt, and where that took Rusty.
You described it very well, actually, Mick. And on the personal front, it was wonderful, because when we think about balance, most people say, well, I want more balance in my life. And what that really means is I want more time for myself. And through this, first attempt, I found more time for myself. But what's fascinating, it still didn't feel balanced. And the reason it didn't feel balanced to me is I had plenty of time for myself, but work no longer had that excitement and that energy. And it wasn't as fulfilling to me, because I wasn't stretching and growing and doing new things. And so it lost some of that edge. As someone who had been successful in my life up until that point, I had always been the top of my class in school, and I'd always done really well in my performance reviews at work, and I had gotten promotions, and I'd been the director of finance, a worldwide director of finance at Apple, and had this huge responsibility, and I was successful, and I felt like that was a big part of my identity and how I saw myself. So in this first phase, part of the lack of balance was losing that part of my identity. I felt like, oh gosh, I was on this track and I got to a point where I couldn't handle it anymore. And so I didn't see myself as successful in the same way. I was doing more of a safe kind of job that you described. And it affected me. And I no longer wanted to talk about work. People would ask me, what do you do? And I would give kind of a short answer, but I would avoid the subject, because I didn't feel good about it. So for me, the lesson in that is that the answer is not necessarily an easy job. And, at that point, I thought that it was sacrifice. Sacrifice required one way or the other: sacrifice your family or sacrifice your career. And I chose to sacrifice my career, but I still wasn't happy. And so, this idea of sacrifice, I think, ultimately isn't a rewarding path, because what I really wanted was meaningful work that challenged me, that gave me an opportunity to grow, and time with my family and for myself. I didn't want to have to sacrifice. I didn't want to make a trade-off, but that was all I knew at that point. And so, and maybe I flip-flopped from one side of the scale to the other, where I was overly weighted on career earlier in my life, and then I had flip-flopped to be overly weighted on family. And that didn't feel right either. So it was, that was my first attempt. And I learned that in the process.
There's so much there to unpack. And sorry, I'm going to keep on expanding. This is really, it's bringing something personal for me as well, Rusty. The thing I want to unpack first is where you were. All right. So have a think about, you're an A student. You're the head of your class at Stanford MBA. You're the worldwide finance director for, I think, the most valuable company in the world. If last time I checked, certainly if it's not, it's still in the top 3 for sure. Mm-hmm. From the outside, that looks like someone has got everything together. It's very, like, people would aspire to the things that you're achieving. But what I'm hearing is you still felt like something was missing. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, it's a challenging place to be, where your life does look good from the outside, but it feels like something is missing on the inside. It's challenging because you want to convince yourself. I wanted to convince myself that it was all fine, and my life should be great. And if I were to talk to somebody else, they would say the same thing. Wow, Rusty, you work at the most valuable company in the world. You've got a great job. Whether it was the director job or the next job I had, where I had demoted myself, either one of those was a great job, and it was stable, and I could manage the job well. I was paid well. There was a lot of good things, and a lot of people would say, I would love to have that career. So if you feel that about your own life, and still you feel like you want more, or there's something missing, that's a challenging place to be, because it feels like, well, am I being greedy? Am I being unreasonable? Am I, what's wrong with me that I've achieved so much of what I wanted to achieve in my life, and yet I still feel like there's a piece missing. And so that place can be a really challenging place to be, because it really calls you into question, like, am I doing something wrong, or is there something wrong with me, or am I being unreasonable here?
Yeah. Okay. And I think there's going to be people in the audience that resonate with that. And I want you to think about that when you are listening to Rusty's story. Think about it for yourself, but then also think about the way that you perceive other people. So when you see someone outwardly successful, that does not automatically mean that they've achieved fulfillment inside. In fact, in some cases, they may be very unfulfilled, and in some cases even depressed, even though outwardly, you might look at their life on Instagram, or you might look at their career and go, oh my God, that person's got everything they could ever imagine. What's on the outside does not actually necessarily translate to what's on the inside or what's going on for them. So please keep that in mind and we talk a lot about comparison. Don't compare yourself to what you see on Instagram or what you see someone's outwardly successful career. Be very mindful of this.
Could I just jump in with a quick thought on that, Mick? I think I'm just thinking back about myself in that era, and part of my desire to post things on social media was to convince myself how good my life is. Right? I mean, part of it is for other people, but other part of it is for me. And yes, of course, in many ways, my life was wonderful, but it was trying to cover up that part of me that was questioning or doubting.
Right.
So, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, we compare our own insides to somebody else's outsides, right?
Yeah.
So you've got that internal sense of questioning or doubt, and you're comparing yourself against their Instagram, which, well, I mean, that's a losing battle.
Yeah, there we go. And Instagram is always a curated version of someone's life.
Yeah.
It's what they want you to see. Okay, very
Mm-hmm.
good. That's a good segue to the second part that I want to unpack, Rusty. When you said you took that demotion, what I was picking up there is some kind of a lesser feeling about yourself, like a loss of identity, like, hey, I'm the worldwide director of finance at Apple. Now I'm not. And somehow that made you lose some kind of identity. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I think for many smart, successful people, our identity is very connected to our work. And that was the case for me, as you described, an A student, top of my class, promotions, worldwide director of finance at Apple. Like I was, felt very accomplished. And I saw myself as an accomplished and successful. And again, I'll put successful in quotes because success, most of us think that word refers to title and salary and all of that. And so from that standpoint, I was successful. When I demoted myself, when I took that step back, I gave that up, felt like I lost that. I no longer was that successful person. And I struggled in that place of what does it mean now? Like, who am I now that I'm not climbing the ladder and progressing? Who am I and what's important to me? And I really didn't have a very good answer to that for many years. And that was part of the malaise or the struggle that I found myself in of, feeling like I wanted something more. Because even though things were great on the outside, there was still this doubt and this question, which was both a desire, but also kind of a negative feeling of what am I about now that, and now that I've given up this thing that was so important to me and that drove me for so much of my life, now what?
That's really powerful language, Rusty. I'd like to ask you a question there. You're now, by my count, and forgive me if I get the years wrong, but you're now 3 or 4 years wiser since that. Maybe it's a little longer than that, but you're several years wiser now. What did you learn about yourself through that?
Well, there's another important intervening event, which was getting divorced in the middle of that. And so I hadn't really thought about this, but until this conversation, but for me, the divorce felt like this very public failure. That taking the lower level job was to some degree a public failure. And that's the part that I was like, oh yeah, maybe that was the first iteration, but it was the second iteration with the marriage falling apart that really brought me to this point where I was, I felt like I was, had the mirage had gone away. For so much of my life, I was focused on being successful as other people viewed me. And I wanted them to see me as successful because that was my identity. But then I had, demoted myself, and then I got divorced. And I had to go through this phase of my life where what does it mean to be me without that success? Because two important elements of it had fallen away. The first is the career piece. And then the second piece was the family piece. I was like, gosh, well, what's left, right? If it's not career and family, what defines me and who am I? And am I a successful person in this world when I have kind of felt like I had failed in both of those areas? So, what I've learned in the intervening years is not to really see those experiences as failure. That's how I saw them at the time, but I don't see them that way anymore. And both of those experiences were tremendous learning opportunities for me. And it was painful.
Mm-hmm.
I had to confront the difficulty of that, living in that place where just questioning who am I and what am I. And now I could have rushed out and tried to fill that with some other new job or new relationship, but I didn't. I actually took the time to sit there for a little while and say, okay, this is uncomfortable, but how do I grow and how do I learn through this to become a better person?
That's a really good perspective there. And I like the fact that you're asking yourself those questions, right? So from what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I've misunderstood, you're redefining the question to not think about thinking about yourself as being what you do, but start thinking about who you are and why you are and what you stand for and all this kind of stuff. And the redefinition of failure is just learning, right? So learning opportunities. I really like that approach. What did you learn about yourself? So when you ask yourself those questions and you go, okay, who is Rusty Gaillard? How did you answer the question?
Yeah. I don't think I answered it in a moment. It's something that I answered over a period of time. And I found that up until that point, I had been seeing myself based on my external accomplishments. And my external accomplishments defined who I was. And I've pretty much turned that formula around, where now who I am drives what I pursue externally in the world. And I think that's for me, that's been such an important change. So who I am, I'm someone who cares about other people, who wants to connect with people and talk to them about their life, who wants to support other people in living their best self. And I strive to continue to bring more and more of who I am into the world. Authentic, courageous, motivated, and caring, and bringing those attributes into my work, showing up that way, being that person in the world. Early in my career, I always assumed that I had to suit up and put on my corporate personality to go into work, right? And I think a lot of people believe this. There's your business self, and then there's your personal self. And this switch to try, rather than letting your job and your external success define who you are, to switch it around and say, let who you are define what you're doing out there in the world, creates an opportunity to say, well, there is no more business version of me and personal version of me. There's just me. And how do I continue to blend those things more and more so that I show up as myself always in the world? Because when you're yourself, you're the most effective, you're the happiest. And rather than, like we talked about earlier, feeling guilty and casting this shadow of guilt on the people around you, now you're all of a sudden being your best self, and you're casting light onto the people around you. And they look at you and they say, wow, who is this person who just, is themselves? They seem very comfortable in their skin. And that's what I want. That's what I want for me. And that's what I continue to strive for. And that's what I want for the people that I work with too. And for everybody, whether I work with you or not.
Rusty, I got to reflect to you. I'm seeing a complete body language and physical language, the tone of your voice change when you talk about that shift in your thinking and your shift to an authentic person, right? So turning up as your authentic self every day, you no longer have to put on an act anymore. It's just, you're just who you are. And then what I'm seeing in you, Rusty, as you talk about that, is someone that exudes confidence, because you now know that you're enough. You are enough. And what you bring to the table is the authentic Rusty. And I think that's amazing. So I think that must take us on to the next chapter in your life, which would be going through life mastery coaching and becoming certified as a coach. So tell us why that was your chosen path and what that brings to the table.
When I decided to become a coach, a number of people would talk to me and say, oh, wow. So tell me about, how did you pick your coaching certification program? Because there's many of them out there. They said, well, you must have done a bunch of research and found which one was the best and gone for that. And I kind of chuckled. I was a little self-conscious about this, but I said, you know what? I didn't do any of that. The way I found this path to becoming a coach is I was sitting in our spiritual center, and there was a guest speaker that day. And this guest speaker, in maybe 20 minutes, helped me break through all sorts of assumptions and limitations and constraints about what I can and can't do, and am I enough, and all of that, and just helped me to just ask this question: if you start with the assumption that you're enough, and you don't worry about how much money you make or what people will think of you or what your background is or any of that. And you just start with this belief that you're enough and you can do in the world what you feel called to do, what feels energizing and motivating to you. What might that be? And in that 20-minute talk, I got this idea of working with people and talking to people about what matters in life. I just, through the experiences that we've talked about, I wanted to have more of that and share it with other people because it had made such an impact in my life. And that's what led me to become a coach. And, I followed up with this guest speaker who was there that day, and I learned about her, and she led me to a woman named Mary Morrissey. And I just loved that message of potential and moving forward and that I am enough. And so I said, that's what I'm going to do. And so I went, and she has a life mastery consulting program. And that was the program that I got trained and certified in. And just to connect it back to your comment from a minute ago, that I had spent probably 15 years in therapy up until this point in my life. And in my mind, in my experience, and I'm not saying this is right, but in my personal experience, therapy was about fixing a problem. Therapy was about, find it, what is it in me that's holding me back, that's a problem, and how do I fix that thing? It tended to be backward looking and problem oriented. And my experience of coaching was forward looking and possibility oriented. So, for me, it was like going from phase A to phase B. It was just a total change in orientation. And I just want to say, I did get value out of therapy. I don't think I got 15 years of value out of it. And I'm sure part of that's on me because I didn't know how to get value out of it. But that shift in orientation from backward and problem oriented to forward and possibility oriented just was thrilling for me and such an exciting thing that just happened to fit perfectly in that moment in my life.
You're tapping perfectly in to the work of Martin Seligman there, which is someone that I follow very closely. And he talks a lot about this, right? So he was the head of the American Psychology Association for a long time, and he's the father of positive psychology. And where positive psychology came about was his view that psychology of the past was all about fixing you, right? Looking into the past and fixing what's wrong with you, whereas positive psychology is about the art of the positive and the possible and looking forward into the future. And to be clear, there's a role for both. There are times that people do need therapy, but coaching is about that positive psychology and looking forward at the positive and the possible. So really, really good, Rusty. That sounded like, when you talk about that event that you went to and you're listening to this speaker, that sounded like that might have been a key fork in the road for you. And fork in the road, sometimes it's a very specific moment, sometimes it's a collection of moments, but it sounds like it's one of those. In your book, you talk a lot about following your heart and following your emotion and not worrying as much about what the rational thought might tell you to do. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Absolutely. And I'll use my own experience there as an example, because in that moment, the heart message that, what came from my heart was, wow, what if I could build a business around working with people and talking to people and connecting with people and helping them? And what I heard in my head, are you crazy? You've been in the corporate world for 25 years. Are you nuts that you're going to walk away from that? You work at the most valuable company in the world. You have a stable, safe job. You have benefits, and you've never worked for yourself before. How would you ever possibly think about leaving? And what if it doesn't go well? And your dad's not going to like it because, that's contrary to his belief on what a good career is. So all of these different thoughts that went through my head in that moment. And so I just find it so important to acknowledge that we always have two parts of us. We have the part of us that is inspired and wants to take action and motivated and excited and energized. And we all have the part of us that's putting on the brakes, saying, are you crazy? You can't do that. It's not the right time. You don't have enough money. You don't know the right people. Wait until you save more money. Wait until your kids are through college, whatever. It's that practical, reasonable voice. And, it was absolutely there for me. And so, step one is to acknowledge that. Just acknowledge that we all have those two sides in ourselves. And step two is just to be deliberate about which of those two voices you're going to listen to. It doesn't matter that you have both of those experiences inside your head. What matters is what you do. What matters is the life that you create, the forks in the road, the decisions that you make, and the directions you go in. So I chose in that moment to pursue becoming a coach. Now, it's important to notice, though, that I didn't march into my boss's office the next day and quit. I mean, it was there's a lot of steps between getting an idea and fully implementing it. But the important thing is to choose courage, to choose the part of you that is inspired and motivated and energized, and to start taking steps in that direction.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And choosing courage, and you do need to act. And yeah, listen to what your head is saying, listen to what your heart is saying, and then choose the courage to act. Let's wind the clock forward now to this year, and now best-selling author of the book Breaking the Code. And I'd like to decompose that a little bit. So for you to write a book called Breaking the Code, that infers that there is a code. So what is the code, Rusty?
The code is our habits and beliefs and assumptions about ourselves and the way the world works. It's our default operating system, if you will. Most of, if you think about when you get up in the morning, when you put your pants on, you always put the same leg in your pants first. And you probably have a pattern of what you eat for breakfast. And what is the first thing you do when you wake up? Do you tend to check your phone, or do you exercise? We all have patterns in life. And those patterns create our results in life. Makes sense, right? Because if you do the same thing every day and you think the same thoughts every day, oh my gosh, I'm tired today, or the traffic's bad, or I have to deal with my boss and I don't like my boss, whatever those thoughts are. But if you continue to repeat them and you repeat the same patterns, of course, you're going to get the same kind of results. Well, those patterns become our code because it's almost as if you were programmed. And by the way, it's not just your physical patterns, but it's your beliefs as well, right? Many of us grew up in a family, like I heard from my parents, money doesn't grow on trees, right? Okay, well, what is that suggesting to you? That money is scarce, that money is important, and you need to be protective and careful about your money. Well, that's a belief system, right? Not everybody holds that belief system. Some people don't particularly care about having money, but you might hold it. And so it's important to notice that we've all been programmed with beliefs, with habits, with our patterns of behavior, and that becomes our code. And our code is a relic of the past. It's based on past experiences, things that we've done in the past, what we've learned in the past. And if you don't deliberately break the code, your future will look like your past, because you're operating from this programming that was based on the past. So of course, you're going to keep repeating the past unless you deliberately break the code.
Okay, so that makes sense. So it's your beliefs, the way that you perceive the world, and it's the habits that you've built up over actually years. It'll be years that those habits have built up, and the things that you've learnt. How do you break the code then? If it's that ingrained, how do you break the code?
Yeah. So breaking the code really does require, first of all, acknowledgement that it exists, right? So we have to acknowledge that we all have these habits. The second part of that is then to, and I actually like to do a kind of use your life as a way of breaking the code. So I actually have broken down code into an acronym in the book. And the C stands for confront. So it's confronting the parts of your life that aren't working the way you would like them to work. So, if you go back to my own personal example, I had taken this demotion and my personal life was pretty good, but I didn't feel like I was very fulfilled in my work. So I have to confront that. I've got to be straightforward and recognize that that is true. And that then creates an opportunity to say, well, what would I like instead? Right? If you have to first recognize where's a part of your life that's not as fulfilling as you would like it to be. And then you can ask the question, what would you like instead? And this is where the next two letters of the acronym come in place. So C is to confront, O is to optimize, and D is to design. So optimize are some of those questions that I heard this guest speaker say to me in that 20-minute workshop or talk. Some of the questions like, what if you didn't worry about how much money you could make? What if you didn't worry about what your family thought? What if you didn't worry about, do I have the education or do I have the experience to do this? What if you didn't worry about what happens if I fail? What if you change some of those beliefs, optimize some of those beliefs, and just sidestep them for a moment, and then get to the next letter, which is D, to design a different experience in your life that would be fully satisfying to you. So in my case, I was like, I'd like to do work that I really has a personal meaning to me. And I was thought, what if that was having these deeper conversations with people? And immediately I go back to, I could never do that, right? That sounds like a therapist or a coach or something, and I'm not qualified. I've never done that. So you have to recognize that old code when it comes back in. And so that's why it's a little bit of an iterative process, right? You keep optimizing. Well, what if it is possible? What if I could do that? And then keep refining your design. And then the last letter for code is E for execute, right? So obviously you confront, optimize, design, and then you get to execute, which means you have to start taking steps, because as you start taking action, you're really starting to shift your identity. Now you're doing something different. And you can point to that and say, oh, look, I did something different today. I'm shifting, I'm growing, I'm looking more and more like this person that I've designed in this vision than I look like the person from my past. So you're starting to execute and put it into practice.
So shifting your beliefs and asking yourself some of those questions. What if this wasn't the case? Or what if I remove that variable, etc.? Yeah, that's really interesting. You spoke in the book there, and you mentioned about possibility there. You spoke in the book about zone of possibility. What is the zone of possibility?
Well, the zone of possibility also helps you to in the midst of this acronym, as you're in the design phase, to be thinking about, what is it that I really would like to have in my life? What would I love in my life? And it helps to find the zone of possibility as you explore that. And there's 3 elements to the zone of possibility. The first one is quiet. And quiet is so important because we live in a noisy world, right? Between the alerts and the emails and the work and all the demands that we have on us, it can be hard to actually get enough external quiet so that you can hear yourself. So quiet is both the external quiet to find a place in your life. It doesn't have to be days, but a half an hour or an hour for yourself, where you can step away from all of the external requirements and listen to yourself. The other part of quiet is the internal part, which is giving yourself enough quiet to stop thinking about, I feel guilty, I should be doing this other thing, and what did I need to get at the grocery store? And we all have the mental chatter. So it's, get some external quiet, get some internal quiet. The second element of the zone of possibility is heart, which is to tune into your heart. Smart, successful people love to think about stuff. We love to figure it out. We love to analyze it. But you're not going to analyze your way to finding what you really want in your life any more than you can analyze your way to what you're going to order for dinner. You don't go to a restaurant and ask for the nutritional analysis of every item on the menu so that you can figure out what you're going to order. You ask yourself, what sounds good, right? It's not an intellectual discussion or a question. So the second element of the zone of possibility is to listen to your heart and let that guide you. And the third element is courage. And because it takes courage to actually listen to that. As I described, even in my own story, when this idea of becoming a coach and working with people came up for me, immediately this other voice popped up and said, well, you couldn't do that. Who are you to think you could make a business out of that? It takes some courage to actually listen to your heart, to quiet some of the mental chatter and be willing to just explore it. Just give yourself permission to explore it. So finding quiet, listening to your heart, and then having the courage to listen to what you hear.
I'm hearing some powerful things there, Rusty. So hearing an element of stopping overthinking. So our minds are always racing at 100 miles an hour, right? So to give yourself the permission, I love that phrase, give yourself permission to stop overthinking, to find a quiet space to listen to yourself, and then give yourself permission to have the courage to follow through on the discovery that you find about yourself when you do so. Really interesting.
Hmm.
In the book, you talk about you can't forget what you've already learned, and you speak about riding bikes and how once you know how to ride a bike, you kind of never forget. With all of these codes and beliefs, etc., how do you unlearn what you've learnt for decades?
What a great question. I actually don't think you unlearn something. I just believe you learn the next, you learn something else that makes that other thing that you know obsolete. So I'll just take a simple example. I think one of the common challenges that a lot of successful people face is this kind of deep-seated fear of I'm not enough. It's easy for me to talk about this because this is there for me, right? This is this very success-oriented, wanting external achievement. And the more of that I have, then it's just demonstrating I'm enough. That's why I like to post all of my great things on Instagram, because then you get to see how good I am. So I don't believe you ever really unlearn that. But what I do believe is you can learn a new skill and a new belief. And the stronger that new belief gets, the less important the old one is.
Okay.
So for me, I practice that. Like I start to notice more and more, when am I feeling not enough? What does it feel like to feel not enough? And when that happens, how can I shift that? How can I shift? Like, I don't want to live my life feeling not enough, right? That sounds like a pretty obvious statement, but it takes some courage and a willingness to say, how do I tune into that and recognize it? And then how do I shift it in the moment and replace it with something that is different? So, back to the learning the bicycle example. It takes some practice, just like anything else. But once you get practiced at it, it gets easier and easier and easier. And so this new skill of I am enough. I don't have to prove anything. I can be myself. The more that I practice that skill and live from that skill, the easier and easier it gets. And it doesn't mean that I'm not enough just goes away, but it just fades into the background because there's a new skill and a new belief that has replaced it.
Okay. So I'm hearing to keep an open mind and to replace old beliefs with new beliefs, or upgrade them, if you like. So upgrade your to a new belief. That's really interesting. And I saw in your book references to invention and the concept that actually the laws of physics don't actually change. Inventions happen where someone brings to life something that was already possible, but they just made it happen through new beliefs, right? And new understandings, right? So new learnings, new understandings. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it makes me think of like people like Rollo May, it talks about creativity being the ability to uncover what was previously hidden through new thinking. Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting.
Absolutely. And fundamentally, we are all creative. And I think that's such an important thing. Like some people say, oh, I'm not a creative person, just because, and many of us associate that with drawing or art or music or something. But we are all creative. We're creating a life every day. We're creating new experiences. We're, creating things at work, whether that's a spreadsheet or a piece of art. We're all creating, and just owning our ability to shape each and every moment and each and every day in a new way. And getting better and better at shaping that in a way that is a reflection of who you are and what's important to you. And that's a real gift that we all have. This blessing of today, right? It's like today's going to come and today's going to go, and that's it. We never get today again. December 3rd, 2021, when we're on here recording this day will never happen again. And so, hey, it's very precious. What will you create with this time? So I think it's important to just know that creativity, and the sky's the limit.
Okay. So now let's get to some areas of where maybe we could give some advice to the people listening at home. And I'm going to purposely play a bit of a negative role here for a moment just to play this out. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, Rusty, about, let's say someone is sitting at home and they're listening to you and they're listening to your journey. They're listening to you. You've followed what you describe in your book as a call to freedom, and you've followed your passion. You've found a way for it not to be a sacrifice anymore, where you're starting to get some fulfillment in your different aspects of your life, career, relationship. You're managing to get that balance through unlocking your beliefs, using the power of belief to look at where you could take your life. Just on the negative side for a second, you spoke about following your heart and not being as rational. What if someone's sitting at home going, well, yeah, that's all very good for Rusty, but I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got a family to support. And, how can I possibly go out of my comfort zone and step into what I really want to do and what my heart tells me I want to do when I've got all of these obligations to meet?
It's a great question. And I'd say two things. Number one is the assumption that you have to, that you will have to sacrifice or give up the ability to pay your mortgage and take care of your family and all of that in order to do what you really want to do. That assumption is what keeps you stuck. So just poke at that assumption. What if you didn't? What if you could make as much money? What if you could even make more money doing what it is that you love to do? So, again, it's going to be very easy to take the negative. Yeah, that's impossible because what I really love, there's no money in that. It's very easy to go right to that assumption. But just, are you willing to get curious? Are you willing to just give yourself 5 minutes to say, what if I were just brainstorm for 5 minutes? What are all the ways in which I could be financially stable and have the kind of work that I would love to do? So I think it's really important to just bust through the skepticism, which we all have, totally natural, and just get curious about it for a few minutes and give yourself just the opening. Just start by opening up a little bit. So that's number one. Number two is the right answer is not necessarily to quit your job. I've got plenty of clients that I've worked with who are much happier and free in their lives, and they're in the exact same job, or they've been promoted in their same company. So the answer is not always to leave and go do something else. It's different for every person. So you have to find for you what it is that would really light up your life and be willing to explore that.
So you do have a chapter in your book, Should I Stay or Should I Go? So I guess that is the fork in the road moment, but you're saying it doesn't always have to be so binary as that. So talk us through that a little bit. When someone does get to that fork in the road and they are thinking it's a binary decision, what advice do you give them at that point?
Some decisions are binary. And so I acknowledge that. But I think that the number one place to start is always to investigate, does this have to be a binary decision? I'll give you my own example of leaving Apple to become a full-time coach. I went into my boss and I said, hey, I'm starting this business and I'm going to leave and I'm going to quit. And so I give plenty of notice. I said, at this date, this is going to be my last day and I'm going to go off and start my business. And he came back and he said, hey, we'd really like you to stay on. Would you consider staying longer? And I did not want to stay on longer full time. I said, no, I'm ready to devote more of my energy to this business. So I'm ready to go. But I said, in that moment, the idea came, I was like, well, gosh, I would work half-time. Are you open to that? And so all of a sudden, in between, I'm either employed or I'm not employed, shows up this third possibility. Oh, what if I'm employed part-time? Which actually was wonderful because it provided a transition, both for me in ramping up my new business, plus for the company in ramping down my involvement there. It was actually a wonderful third solution that I didn't even think about going into it because I just assumed it's either A or B. So I use that as an example for people when they get to this, well, it's, should I stay or should I go? It's got to be one or the other, to just open up the possibility of middle ground and explore, does it really have to be A or B, or could there be some blend of the two or some middle ground? And if it ultimately is A or B, yes, you're going to have to make a decision at some point. But once again, that wasn't the first thing I did after I got the idea to become a coach. I didn't march into my job and quit. By the time you get to that choice of it's going to be A or B, assuming it is really truly a binary decision, by the time you get to that choice, it should be pretty obvious to you which is the right one to go.
Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. That takes us on to one more line of questioning I'd like to discuss before we go into our rapid fire round. This is the leadership project, Rusty. So our audience are leaders, they're up and coming leaders that are looking to perfect their craft, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of what we've been talking about today is a lot about self-leadership and self-discovery. And I think that's really important for any leader to be able to have these skills to find your own purpose and meaning, your own journey, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I want to take a step outside that now. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of your manager in Apple, where Rusty comes into your office and says, hey, boss, I'm following my dream. I'm going off to do these things. What advice could you give to a leader who is seeing their team go through a similar kind of journey where one of their team members comes to a fork in the road or some kind of thing? Or it could be a friend, like a friend comes to you for advice and says, I'm really thinking about changing things up. What advice could you give to people in that situation?
Most of us tend to look at the world from a scarcity mindset, meaning there's not enough to go around. And we're more afraid of what we're going to lose than what we might gain. So it would be very common for a manager in a position like that to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose this employee, and this person's been, has an important job and has been adding a lot of value. I don't want to lose them. I want you to stay. And my encouragement or my suggestion is to flip the switch from what you might lose to what you might gain by supporting this person in becoming their best self. I'm just a huge believer that the world as a whole benefits, you benefit, everyone around you benefits when you become and continue to move down the path towards being your best self. And if you have the opportunity to support someone in that, in supporting them and finding what really matters to them and stepping forward into that, that is a blessing. And I hope everybody takes that opportunity to support it in others and use it as inspiration for yourself. I've certainly had many people I saw before me leave Apple to go on and do amazing things, pursue a career in sports business, or to pursue herbal medicine and acupuncture. I mean, these are like finance people who go on to do this stuff. So I was so inspired by that. People saying, hey, I've devoted many years of my life to this one thing, but I'm ready to go to the next chapter. So take the inspiration from people who are really leaning forward in their life and exploring who they are and bringing that more forward in their life, and take that inspiration and support them in it, and just get curious with yourself. Wow, what would it look like for me to be even more myself? Again, it doesn't mean necessarily leaving your job, but how can you bring even more of the human side of you into work? Don't put on the corporate suit, but bring the personal part of you. How can you bring more of that into work so that you're happier and ultimately more effective? So I think it's an invitation and opportunity.
There's a lot there, actually, Rusty. So from the leader's perspective, the things that are jumping into my mind are questions like, how is it going to serve you or them to hold them back? And the answer is probably not at all. The next one is, what are the positive impacts that could come from their departure? Once again, for you and for them. And then I liked the example that you gave with your Apple manager about, well, is there another possibility that hasn't yet been explored together, and explore it together? I think that's quite interesting as well. And that last bit that you're saying makes me think about, if you are not finding passion at what you're doing, take another look first. Like, so have a look at the perspective of how could I look at my current situation differently to achieve a deeper level of purpose and happiness. Yeah, really interesting, Rusty. I really appreciated that. That was I enjoyed talking through that. So that brings us to the end of that part of the interview. I'd like to go into our rapid fire round, and I'm dying to ask you this question, Rusty, because I read your book and I look at the journey that you've been through, and I can't wait to hear what you say on this one. What's the one thing that you know now, Rusty, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I would say it's always scary and it always takes courage. Having made some of these decisions to demote myself, to start a new career, and even along the way, just so many of the smaller decisions, none of them is ever easy, but it's being willing to listen to your heart, to find that zone of possibility, to listen to your heart, and then have the courage to say, I'm going to go explore this. For me, finding that rather than taking the safe route, I think I took the safe route more often when I was younger, but it's the adventure of life. And so I think for me, it's the times when I've had the courage that have created the most meaningful experiences. And I just wish that younger version of me had more of that to start that whole journey earlier.
Wonderful. Yep. Have courage, take action. Nothing changes unless you do something different. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah.
All right. You're a best-selling author. What's your favorite book?
It's a hard question for me to answer. There's so many books that I like. One that I read recently and keep coming back to is The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I think as for the listeners here, it's a wonderful book. It's really about, as we've been talking about, bringing your best self to work. So I'm a big fan of that. It's a multiple authors. Diana Chapman is one of them, but The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
All right, nice. And what's your favorite quote?
I have a number of them, but the one that comes to mind, hold on a second, I just want to make sure I get it right. It's actually from Bob Dylan. And it goes like this. He says, "What's money? A man is a success if he gets up in the morning and goes to bed at night, and in between does what he wants to do." I love that because it's captures an essence of freedom, but it also captures a mindset and a mentality of, how do I bring that mentality of everything that I'm doing, I'm choosing to do it. I'm doing it because I want to do it rather than I have to do it. And it's just a reminder to just say, hey, you're in charge of your life. You get to do what it is that you want to do. So however you relate to those things, choose them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I almost feel like we're going to start a new interview here. But now you're getting into the realm of choice theory from William Glasser, and the thoughts that everyone wants to be in power of their own decision making and doing things because they want to do them, and getting inspired into action because they want to do things, not because they were told to do things. And when people fight against that nature, that's where the friction comes. Whether it's fighting against just your own personal kind of choices internally or someone else imposing their will on you, that's where the friction comes in, right? So yeah, that was really powerful. I love that. Thank you, Rusty, for sharing that. And I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Leadership Project today. I've thoroughly enjoyed researching your work leading up to today's interview, and I strongly encourage people at home to please do study Rusty and look at his book and some of the work that he does. Have a look at his live program called Fork in the Road. I think you'll find it very interesting. Loved hearing your story today. Loved watching you talk through it and watching the different facial expressions and body language as you went through some of the emotions again of the journey that you've been through. So thank you so much for joining us on the show. Final question, and then I'll leave you to also closing remarks. how do people get hold of you if they'd like to know more about Silicon Valley Dream Builders or more of your work?
The best ways to reach me are my website, which is Silicon Valley Dream Builders, but it's svdreambuilders.com. So svdreambuilders.com stands for Silicon Valley Dream Builders. And on LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there and I love engaging with people. So it's Rusty Gaillard. It's Gaillard is how you spell my last name, Gaillard. So LinkedIn and on my website.
Outstanding. And we're going to put those links in the show notes as well, for make it easier for people to find them. So thank you once again, Rusty. This has been a great pleasure and a great honor having you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Mick.